Alright, so I do remember this design and I did enjoy it. There are things that I feel like could have been improved at, so let's just go through a few.
He is Sinix Design, art teacher and YouTuber, also the man who created the yearly event called ChromaCore, an art bootcamp with a competition that requires a character design as an entry. There was one specific year that I want to highlight, and it was 2022, where this was my entry submission that failed right at the qualifier. Hi, my name is NAKA, digital artist for the last 10 years, winner of ChromaCore in 2024, second place in the year before, but as I said, wasn't even selected back in 22. And today we are trying to fix that 2 years old mistake by understanding what went wrong and redesigning her based on what we are going to learn. If you look at this piece, you might not recognize the problem right away, so let me remove every detail that either doesn't tell any important information about her as a person or details that repeats. As you see, there is not much left. She is an engineer, but what kind? She is chewing a pencil, repairing things, but what else? What's her name? We don't know any of those just by looking at this busy character sheet. There are a lot more other problems as well, but most of them are connected to one major issue: the fact that I forgot to develop an actual character before drawing it. Concept art is all about having an idea and visually explaining it, so in order to have a nice one, we need to have a good idea first. No need for reinventing the wheel, but we are definitely aiming for something that is interesting. So let's push that engineer a bit further by asking a new question. What type of engineer is she? A quick Google search later, I found the sappers. On-field engineers at the military helping the squad by repairing, fortifying, breaching, bridge building, deactivating mines or even laying them. At this point, I'm leaning towards the cyberpunk genre, so I need to adjust things visually. The clear benefit here is that I don't need to be realistic as long as I make it somewhat believable. That also helps my plan to make a protagonist out of an engineer, to create a loner who actually roams around and fixing things on the battlefield. But that creates a new problem. An engineer without a workshop is very limited. So if she can't leave the workshop but need it on the battlefield, then let's move the workshop with her to the battlefield. Just imagine that thing folding up into a mech, then walks to the place where it's needed to unfold to be a functional engineering station. Having all the necessary tools that an engineer might need, fabricating or 3D printings out of scrap metal, functioning as a makeshift command center if needed, by providing cover. After all, it's designed for the extreme conditions of war. Once we have everything necessary sketched out, it's time to refine the design. I'm starting with the girl by drawing the line art. As you see, it's still sketchy and messy, but instead of overdrawing it on a new layer, I'm refining the details on the same one. This way, it's more likely to keep dynamic and expressive parts from the sketch, while those could dull out if I create a new layer and redraw everything. This method is kinda similar to blockout in painting, since I'm jumping back and forth between brush and eraser, technically carving out the shape of lines. The result feels more rough in exchange, but I personally prefer that way. As it normally goes, line art is followed by coloring. Nothing really special happens here. I separate all the colors to different layers, so they will be easier to modify if I came back later to change something. The original design already had a working color palette, so I don't even need to come up with a new one. The only thing that I changed is that I removed red. It's a complementary color to green and too close to orange. By removing it, I'm reduced the amount of colors, what also makes the read more clean. A small amount of light and shadow at the end, just to make her feel finished. Jumping to the mech design, I have different approach in mind. Instead of drawing, I use part of the traditional painting process by blocking out shapes, then refining them. Normally, it's not ideal to use vastly different art processes in the same piece to represent two individual things, talking about the character and the mech, but it's possible to connect the two methods with a few tricks. By only using the same brush, same color palette, restricting on gradient and curvy shapes, the final aesthetics will match. Not even talking about the fact that my line art on the character design was already made with that blockout-ish method instead of clean lines. Alright, we laid down everything necessary. A character design backed up with setting plus mech design that sells the genre. At this point we could call the day and submit if the entry for Chroma Core was a character concept sheet. The purpose of a concept sheet is to visually explain your idea, mostly used in pre-production. During that period, when studios laying down the foundation of a movie or a game, they don't need to refine everything. Therefore, concept art's purpose never was to impress people, but to effectively define things to the team, what's necessary to proceed in the production. On the other hand, everything changes if you need to submit your art to people who doesn't know anything about you or your character. In this scenario, presentation is much better. Instead of focusing on effectively explaining the idea, now our goal is to sell the idea, what also includes some explanation, but that's not the main point. And that's the reason why I'm focusing much more on gesture and expression, trying to make the silhouette read better to get a stronger first impression. And this is even more important if you compete in an environment like Chroma Core. Amongst more than 1,000 artists, you need something to stand out. Your art is given, I can't give you advice on that. The direction to choose while developing a character changes artist by artist, so just do something that makes you excited. But what is universal, no matter how you approach art, is taking some extra time on coming up with something interesting. And thinking about how to represent it in a better way is a guaranteed way to get a better result. Also, it's something that even a beginner can do, yet from time to time professionals forget. Speaking of forgetting things, let's finally give her a name. Angie Sepper is quite a dumb one, but it does the job. Easy to remember, but what's much more important, makes people talk about her as Angie instead of that character. After this little sidetrack, we are actually on the last step, the presentation. Instead of submitting one picture, I decided to separate information through 3 pages. This way I have much more control over what people see in what order. So let's jump into the first page. Just the illustration with the name, making somewhat of a statement of she is Angie Sepper and telling nothing more. So they go for the next page to find out what else we have, instead of getting overwhelmed by the get-go. The follow-up page must be the character concept sheet tailored to be pleasant to look at. I could include all the early sketches about her to show how hard I worked, but that would scatter the focus, showing her from the front, from the back, with some description here and there, only telling things with words that are necessary. Later on, I made these 2 comic panels to explain her buggy clothes, an EOD suit that inflates like an airbag upon explosion, what explains why it's so loose, while adding some humor and functions as a reference how messed up her job is. Moving to the last page, we show the workshop, the companion that enables her to be a loner problem solver on the warfield, by showcasing it while moving and when it's deployed, just enough to make it clear that it can do both of those. Naming it Vagabond Workshop also strengthened the concept of Angie being a loner, while the description of autonomous engineering platform doubles down on making it clear that it moves by itself. As a last touch, I added a similar sign, like what we had in the previous page with the explosion, a morbid yet funny little thingy to add charm, humor while explaining things. Alright, this will be the point when I show you the final result, mumble about like and subscribe, but we need to check if all the things that I said are actually valid. So let's see what Sinix has to say. He didn't watch my video yet, and I didn't get his feedback before I got to this point of editing. So let's see if the result of this process gets the pass or not.
Hello, Sinix here, and I'm going to be doing a quick review of NAKA's designs. So, starting off, I'm going to be looking at his original cadet design from 2022, just giving some quick thoughts on it. Alright, so I do remember this design, and I did enjoy it. There are things that I feel like could have been improved at, so let's just go through a few. First of all, I do love the presentation, the little chewed up pencil and everything. That stuff's great. So the presentation's delightful. But design-wise, let's take a look at the character. I do feel like that some of the posing gets a little bit stiffer than I might be used to seeing NAKA do lately. You have a lot of the limbs and stuff that are kind of like conforming and trying to squeeze into a smaller silhouette shape. It's obviously one big part of design is really enhancing the peaks and valleys of things. So that could be something like making the jacket a little bit puffier, but certainly you could get that by just adjusting the pose. So you don't have like a hand that feels like it's resting right along the line of the outer thigh, or the other arm that's just kind of obscuring any of the other movements of the silhouette. You have a lot of little things, and I would say these build up the design economy into just smaller, unnecessary details at times. A lot of smaller wires, smaller tools. So a lot of the elements feel, just like they're trying to be a little bit shy and underdeveloped. Now, color-wise, I think we're doing relatively good stuff. Perhaps could be a little bit stronger of an accent, but I like the punch of this reddish tone in here to counter all of the greens. Obviously, those complement each other. That works good. Balance-wise, I do feel a little bit strange about how low the overalls come up on the character, and that's not because of anything fashionable or anything like that. My issue is just that I feel like it splits the character very much in the center, from the top half to the bottom half. And generally, for design purposes, I'm always looking for hierarchies to be pushed into stronger and stronger ratios. And anytime you have something that feels very 50-50 and just cut right in half between shoulder and foot, I always feel like that's a little tricky. I see some issues with just, silhouette read. I do feel like the overall kind of some of the anatomy is a little bit weaker than I've seen in NAKA's later stuff. Once again, peaks and valleys are very light on some of that stuff. And I just feel a little bit awkward. Even we can see over here the way the hands, it just feels like everything's trying to squeeze into itself and you're not getting any silhouette reads out of it. There's also, kind of a little bit too much simplicity in just the way the anatomy is handled. Maybe the hair being pulled back. It just feels a little bit too strict in a sense that takes it away from an organic feeling. So, having said all of that, I'm actually very curious to see what an update of this character would look like with NAKA's new skills. So let's move on. All right, well, here it is. And I have to say right off the bat, we're certainly fixing a lot of those peaks and valleys being a little shy that we saw before. For the record, fairly different as a design. I wasn't sure how close it would be to the original. This feels like it's just taking the concept of the what the character is meant to do and then just kind of reinterpreting them pretty broadly. Across the board, I'm seeing a lot of good improvements. We got some stronger shape dynamics happening, straight lines against these big, bold movements, outward and inward of just large shapes, which was kind of missing from the previous one. Even the breakup of, everything where things are cut up, with the top, the pants, everything. There's much more hierarchy going on. Nothing really feels like it's just being split in half. So, it's kind of a night and day improvement in a lot of those design senses. Just the feeling of energy in a lot of this stuff feels like it has somehow gotten a lot stronger. But let's try to analyze it as its own piece. So we have, once again, a jacket that is much more substantial. I like the use of the big gloves to, once again, get like some areas of the body that feel very narrow, some areas that are expanding a lot. And even the feet, while they're not making themselves like leaning further into like anatomical accuracy, the fact that they've committed to their shapes and not felt like they were in an awkward middle ground, I think is still good. I think that works better. I think it, doesn't become too distracting. And, generally just really sells shapes above everything. And I feel like that works best for NAKA's style. I always felt a little strange if NAKA tries to kind of get a little bit too much focused on like realistic anatomy and stuff, because the strength is in the shapes and the personality and the style of them all. Even pockets and just props and stuff, they all feel like they take up a little bit more substance and mass. So color balances look great. I like that there is now a big, a medium, and then the orange feels like the small little hint, and it really pops strongly at the top and then has a couple little notes of it on the elbows and around some of the trim to just keep it really strong. So ratios feel like the biggest thing that have improved, as well as just peaks and valleys of design. And even in the different poses, this pose over here looks great. Presentation is still top notch. No issues there, but there weren't any issues, honestly, in the past either. The one thing that I feel like could find a little bit more peak and valley if I was going to critique something is just how the hair comes off around the head in the front view. I think it's generally good. I think there's a little bit of losing whether this information is like just their hair on the top of their head or whether it's something like a bun thing behind their head, their hair pulled back. Because when we see it over here, I'm like, oh, okay, I understand it now. It's the hair is behind them. But when you just quickly see it in this view, you kind of feel like the hair is almost just on their head and going off to the side, waving off to the side. How people might draw like my hair when it was a little longer as a cartoon. And there's a few ways to fix it, whether it be through adding like a hint of like a band or color or something to just show that break. But clothing looks great. Ratios look great. Even like cutouts of things, they all seem to kind of have ratios of like, oh, this is bigger, this is more medium, this is smaller, and they're always shifting. They're going back and forth a lot. And I like that a lot. There's also other parts of this image. We got some industrial design stuff, which look pretty good. I feel like this could have been in my TMNT playset as a kid, perhaps. A little mobile command center for the Ninja Turtles. The legs are reasonable and functional. I do think there is chances to make them a little bit more substantial in each of the joints, specifically maybe in this kind of more forward, this secondary joint. You really could just keep bulking that stuff up. It's always good to really build mass as strongly as you can around any joint. And it feels like it does lose a little bit or become a little bit lost just in these lower joints into that top part right in there. And then we have the little personality shot, the little cover page or whatever it might be. And once again, the anatomy stuff I feel like has so grown to just feel confident with what it's doing and not try to chase after other styles or kind of feel like it's in between a couple styles. Because you look at things like the way this gloved hand is positioned and resting, and it's like, yeah, that looks great. The general movements of stuff. Now, in theory, there is a little bit more in like the anatomical development. I like the style that it's going for, but there are a couple aspects, mostly with just how the shoulders feel, especially this one and this one, like in relationship to each other. Very minor stuff. It's definitely a big improvement overall. I like the view of this character from this way because you get that strong separation of the hair and the top of their head and all of that stuff. So overall, as good as the last one was, in 2022, this is a hands down across the board improvement. NAKA is, it would easily be one of my picks as a cadet. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that was fun. And that's really all I have to say. So good job, NAKA. Actually, wait, hold up one second. Let me just zoom in here. Yeah. Now that I look at it again, I do have to point out this repeating line shape happening twice in a row. Two similar mountains back to back. I take back everything. Negative points for NAKA. Would not pick. So just needed to throw that in there. How dare you? 9 out of 10. Moving on.
All right. The new design passed the test, and this is definitely a good thing, but not in a way I expected. Sinix mostly focused on shape hierarchy and silhouette read, which does nothing with the topic of this video. We were all about improving her as a character and tailoring the presentation around that, raising the question, was it even worth it? Short answer, yes, absolutely. Bit longer version, I could submit just a better looking engineer, but I took all the effort for developing Angie, what gave me more tools to play with. The self-inflating EOD suit is giving her a nice silhouette read. The mech wouldn't exist if I wasn't tinkering with the idea how to give her equipment on the battlefield. All of these small things filled up the presentation that no longer just a bunch of visual noise of unnecessary details, but a coherent showcase of Angie Sapper and the Vagabond workshop. She's no longer just an engineer. Okay, thank you Sinix so much for sparing some time on my experiment. Thank you for watching my first video, and last but not least, thanks to these wonderful people for the support that started this channel. I'm planning to make more content in the future, subscribe if you would like to follow it, and I would absolutely appreciate if you consider leaving a comment on what to improve or even what would you like to see here. No promises, but at this point I'm a bit blind on what topics people prefer. So yeah, it will be a huge help.